Yo, it's a New York. Yo, it's a New York. Yo, it's a New York. To New York, to New York. With the yo, it's a New York. Yo, it's a New York. Yo, it's a New York. To New York, to New York.
And welcome to Crash Chords Autographs. Today, we welcome Insane Ian, parody artist and comedy musician from Baltimore, Maryland. Also a member of the Funny Music Project, a.k.a. the FuMP, Ian is here to talk with Matt about how he got started down the path of hilarity, and about what goes into creating a solid, funny sketch on a comedy album. His latest album, called Internet Famous, has a title track featuring Ballew of the Presidents of the United States of America. From the inside scoop on how that collaboration developed, to the origins of the FuMP, to music, movies, gaming, and more, here's presenting Matt Storm and Insane Ian.
Ian, thank you for taking the time to chat with me for Crash Chords Autographs. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate that. It's going to be a whole mutual appreciation society going on here, I have a feeling.
I have a feeling as well. I'm glad to bring you to my show. A parody artist, comedian, rapper, musician extraordinaire. I became a fan of your work after you actually reached out to me, I believe, after hearing me on the Epic Podcast.
That is correct, yes. I mean, as far as me reaching out to you is correct, I wasn't really sure when you became a fan of me, but now that you've said that, I'm all smiles. So.
So, of course, I want to start by talking about your newest record, which just came onto Spotify recently, though it's been out for a little while, Internet Famous.
Yep.
This is your, according to Spotify, your third album, but you've had a lot more than that because you've been working on the FuMP for a while. Is that correct?
Yes. This is my third traditional album, but I have a whole bunch of EPs and B-side collections and a lot of other releases because I have learned while working at the FuMP that I am far too prolific. And one of the things at the FuMP, for your listeners who don't know what the FuMP is the Funny Music Project, or THEFUMP.com, where we release 2 comedy songs a week for free under a Creative Commons license. And I am one of the core members of that site, and with that, I try to put out at least 1 song a month on the site. And we have like over 40 other artists on the site. It's kind of like a coalition of other comedy musicians, and we bring in new artists all the time who use the little submit form on the side, but it was started by a core group of comedy musicians who've all been popular on the Dr. Demento show, and they invited me into the fold after my songs became popular, and my songs became popular by being posted on the FuMP. So, but because of being on the FuMP, I post a lot of songs, so I have a lot of output. So I have a lot of releases now.
Well, that's always good, I guess. A lot of work is better than no work, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
I
try to strive for quality over quantity sometimes.
Well, that definitely makes sense. You know, you don't want to become the quality of the pop artist you parody.
Exactly.
Nobody wants that. I did want to talk briefly about the title track because the title track, of course, which is called Internet Famous, features the one and only lead singer of the Presidents of the United States. I wanted to know how that connection happened, how you ended up getting in touch with him.
That's kind of a long story, so I'll try to shorten it because I tend to yammer, so I will I will try to shorten my yammering. I'm a little ADD sometimes, so I tend to, every sentence is a run-on sentence, which is why rap is really fun for me. So I was a fan of the Presidents back in the 90s when the Presidents were popular. And the Presidents broke up in 96, 97. Mm-hmm. So I produced a tribute album to them on my stupid little record label that I had in my basement. And through that, I actually got a connection to Ballew through their management. And while I was doing that, I was also working on a Weird Al tribute album. So I got Ballew to re-record a song that he recorded when he was but a youth called Are You Going to the Weird Al Concert? By asking, or basically begging his management to see if I could get a contact with him about him covering this song, because I had talked to him on a radio show once, and I said, hey, I remember hearing about this song. Can you do this song? Are you guys going to release this as a President's track? They broke up. It never came happening. But he ended up getting my number and calling me.
Wow.
And finding out that he re-recorded this song for this Weird Al tribute album I was producing. So through the connection of the President's tribute album I was doing and the Weird Al tribute album I was producing, I became known as a President superfan. And me and these three other guys who were running what's called ChrisBallew.net, which was after the breakup of the band. Chris was doing a ton of other side projects, and so these guys were keeping track of that. So the superfans, the four of us, which is now expanded to about 6 of us, we get kind of like an inside track on things that Chris is doing. And as a way of saying thank you for all the years of support and everything, he agreed to do a song on this album for me. So Internet Famous is kind of an interpolation of the President's tune Naked and Famous. I took the riff from that. I took the main music from that, and I kind of turned it into a hip-hop beat. I had Klopf and Pop, who's a nerdcore producer and a nerdcore rapper himself, who also is based in Seattle, so this is a completely Seattle production on this track. Had him do the music for this, and he even stripped it down to the President's instruments. He did it with a 2-string bass guitar and a 3-string git bass, which is awesome.
That is cool.
And he authentic President's instruments with it, and got Chris to sing the hook on it and do a couple little improvs with the vocals and everything, and it was great. And it's actually the second time I've worked with Chris on the track. I did a We Are the World style song on my first album called There's Something About a Zombie.
Oh, yes, I remember.
Zombie benefit song. If you've seen the movie Shaun of the Dead,
of course,
was inspired by the song that Coldplay was talking about doing, their Zombie benefit.
Oh, nice.
It's kind of like a We Are the World / Coldplay style song. And Chris Ballew opens the song on that track.
Very cool.
Chris has kind of been really, really nice and really supportive about the people who've been supporting him. So that he's been super awesome and really one of the sweetest, nicest guys in rock and roll. And really, really cool. So the fact that I got him on this track, I've been trying to work with him for years, honestly, and he agreed to do it. And, it's been a huge honor. So
that's fantastic. Yeah, it's always nice. I mean, what I like about nerdcore and comedy music and most indie music in general is that there's a lot of camaraderie. I often talk about this with the nerdcore rappers I interview, is that the community around nerdcore and most indie music scenes in general is very supportive of each other. I mean, it's how...
Absolutely, yeah.
It's how I got Schaefer on my show. Is I'd just been fans for a while. We became friends after that just from staying in touch and seeing each other at shows and then working together. And he would be hosting burlesque or I'd be doing sound for burlesque. And it's just really cool to see when things like that line up.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm a big fan of the new record. I really enjoy all of your stuff. I think the newest record has kind of something that the other records, it's just that next step. You grow with every record that you make, and that's what you want to do as a musician, and it definitely shows.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
My next question is, although I'm pretty sure I know the answer, so obviously your main focus is parody. It's comedy music. You do a lot of parody songs, rather. It's hard to mention parody without, of course, mentioning the man you mentioned earlier, Mr. Weird Al. I assume he was a big influence on your career.
You could definitely say that he was an influence on my career. There have been 3, I guess you could call them fan-made Weird Al tribute albums. I guess you can kind of call them indie Weird Al tribute albums that have been released over the years. I am the only comedy artist to appear on all 3 of them.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
It helps that I produced the second one myself. But yeah, I'm the only comedy musician to appear on all 3 Weird Al tribute albums. And the first Weird Al tribute album that was released, which is called Prosthetic Lips, which was produced by Joe Kraus, who is one of the guys in a group called Zelda and the Unibrows. He produced that album, and on that album, I didn't do a song. I did a spoken word track.
Mm-hmm.
There is the Dr. Demento show, which is where Weird Al got his start, the Dr. Demento radio show, has a news segment called the Demented News, and Whimsical Will does the Demented News, but he also does, occasionally he'll do these bits where he, layers in music and stuff, kind of like Dickie Goodman did on the old records, where like take clips of songs and uses them as people like responding to an on-the-street interview or something like that. But he like layers like, the names of songs and the names of albums and tracks and stuff like that into conversation. So without actually sampling anything, because if I sampled anything, it probably wouldn't have cleared it and made it onto the album. So I just did a spoken word piece that used 54 Weird Al album titles and song titles in it, and told a story of Al.
That's
and
cool.
On that album, my name is Insane Ian Bonds, and Insane Ian is in quote marks, because hero worship is a thing. Because Weird Al is in quotes and Yankovic isn't, Insane Ian is in quotes, and so now every so often, that's the only release that I'm listed as that on. Every so often online, my name will come up as Insane Ian Bonds, and the name will be in quotes, and I'm like, no, I dropped the quote marks, I dropped the last name, it's just Insane Ian. It pops up that way occasionally, just from that one single release.
So did you always want to do comedy music, or did you dabble in other things first before you kind of embraced the parody and comedy?
Ever since high school, I'd been writing parodies because actually even middle school, I'd been writing parodies and comedy songs because Weird Al was a huge influence. My parents actually were a filk group. I don't know if you know what filk is.
I do.
It's kind of like the progenitor of modern nerd music. As Z from Hipster Please and Radio Free Hipster has called me a second-generation nerd musician, in that my parents were filk artists back in the late 70s, early 80s, and I kind of picked up the mantle and started doing it from that. So, watching my parents and, local artists, the Boogie Nights, who do comedy songs as well, and they, but they do it with more of a medieval ilk, to theirs. They do parodies, but they're all about, Lord of the Rings and Knights of King Arthur and stuff like that. So I've always kind of been influenced by that. And so I've been writing that for a while, but when I actually started doing comedy, I started with stand-up first. I did stand-up for about 3.5 years. And I found, because I come from a theater background, I was too over-rehearsed to do stand-up.
Right.
My jokes weren't coming off conversationally. So I did improv for 1.5 years. I was with an improv troupe here in Baltimore called the Early Monday Morning Show. Helped co-write their theme song and performed with the group. My band at the time was called Dick Snorkel. And all the while I'm doing this, I have other comedy bands in the background while I'm doing stand-up comedy or while I'm doing improv. And after doing all of those things, it made me realize I should just focus on one thing, and I focused on the comedy music for a while, and I found a combination of me working with a good person who could do the music well and help me produce it well, and that was my friend Ben Stahl, and he helped me, and my buddy Mike Stetz, who helped me get together one song really well, which was Guitar Hero.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of was like the springboard for, oh, hey, I could actually do this moderately well. Let me focus on this. So,
awesome. Well, I mean, there's definitely a care for the genre. I mean, there aren't a ton of parody artists that are super. Well, first of all, they will probably never be a parody artist as big as Weird Al, just because he's been so prolific for so long. But I find now
and still kicking so much ass too. I mean, he had the #1 record after a 32-year career.
Yeah.
Hit #1 in the debut. It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that also attributes to the new internet culture. Weird Al can get even more appreciation more quickly because of how viral his newest album was and all those music videos. And I think that's why there's a resurgence of comedy musicians, too, because the internet really, being, like the title of the record, internet famous, it really is, in moments, very easy to be internet famous, even for a brief time, and it's just riding that, ride and finding the next jump.
I'm at my 14 minutes and 59 seconds, and I'm coasting on that last second for as long as I goddamn can.
Which brings me to, speaking of the internet and videos and YouTube, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the Dig Dug music video. One of my favorite songs that you've done completely is Dig Dug, because you took a really terrible pop song and made it fun and funny. Because I don't think it's any secret to anybody that Kesha's stuff is not great. But I'm not here to bash on a pop artist. I'm here to talk about your video. So I watched it actually for the first time last week. I hadn't had a chance to see it sooner, and I loved it. How was that video shoot? What were the requirements? Was it just kind of a single cam and you doing a few different things, or was it more complicated than that?
It ended up being more complicated than it should have been. That video actually ended up taking 3 years to make.
Wow.
I had started making the music video for it, and I had shot a couple of things at a local arcade here called Crabtown, USA, which is it's a restaurant that has like 70 arcade machines in the back, 20 pinball machines that line the walls, and these are all old school classic arcade games, and like nothing new is in this place.
Mm-hmm.
So like the most recent thing they have is like NFL Blitz 99.
Oh, wow.
And that's actually right next to the Dig Dug machine. But they had a Dig Dug machine there, and I was like, we have to film here now. And I started filming the video in 2009, which was, 2010, which was when I was supposed to be the opening act for Nerdapalooza. And when I started filming that, my budget ran out because I got into a car accident and had to repair my car. And which stopped me. I had to cancel opening Nerdapalooza. I had to cancel going to Nerdapalooza, which broke my heart.
Mm-hmm.
And so I couldn't go to that gig. I had to, shut that down. But it started me to do a Kickstarter for a collection called Grand Theft Audio, which was my B-side collection as well as a DVD. I was like, if I'm going to do one music video, screw it. I'm going to do a lot of music videos. And so the DVD became, the budget for the Kickstarter was to make a bunch of music videos. And so the Kickstarter went off. It was down to, like, the wire, and then suddenly somebody donated, like, $800 at the last minute.
Wow.
And helped push it well over the edge of what I needed. The Kickstarter only had 13 backers, and I made well over what the budget was supposed to be, which was like a godsend. I was just under making what the goal was supposed to be, and then suddenly I was over the goal, and I was like, holy crap, I guess I'm going to do this now. So we ended up doing a whole bunch of videos, did an animated video for a song I did with Schaefer.
Yeah.
And the Dig Dug video ended up being the last video that we got a chance to complete. Through various problems of getting, actors to come in and do things, the collection got pushed back a little bit from when it was supposed to come out, but it did eventually come out, and Dig Dug was a result of that, so it finally came out, and it's still, I don't think I'll ever be able to do a video as good as Dig Dug.
Well,
I have my buddy Bob Rose to thank for that. He's an amazing editor, and he helped shoot the thing. It's all his one camera, but, we shot it in multiple locations and multiple times. If you look at the video closely, you'll notice the size of my goatee changes in length.
No, that's just your really lame mutant powers, that you can just change the length of your sideburns. The next question I wanted to ask is, so obviously you're influenced by, comedy musicians who come before you, and, comedy music is where your main focus is. You told me about your stand-up background. I'm curious what you do when you're not making parody music. I can gather that I imagine you play video games, read comic books, watch movies.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I want to clarify, not everything I do is parody. I do have a lot of originals on the albums, too.
Sure.
But I do what, because it's hero worship, I do what Weird Al does in that some of the originals are what he calls a style parody or a pastiche of a certain artist. Mm-hmm. I'll have a song on the album like I'm Sorry, which is a pastiche of Rob Zombie. It's not a direct parody of any particular Rob Zombie song, but you get the idea, and I just want to clarify that. Sorry.
Oh, sure, of course. And yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of my favorites that you've done are actually not parodies, but originals, that are in a style of. I always like a versatile musician who can do those different things, because, I mean, parody, not that it's not complicated. I mean, it does, of course, take skill and talent to do a parody, but, you can get a lot of help if you're just parodying a song, whereas if you're creating an original composition based on another style, that takes even more focused thinking and writing, because you're still creating an original work. You're not using notes and style that have existed already. You're kind of creating something new.
Right, exactly.
But the question I was working my way to kind of longly is, what do you do in your downtime when you're not making music of any kind? Do you have a favorite video game of all time, or a preferred movie or album you like to listen to or watch?
I do, actually. I am a born and bred nerd, man. I was raised in the faith, and when I say that, that means that I've been doing the Vulcan salute since 6 months old. I've always been a geek, a nerd, whatever you want to label it as. I love video games. I love comic books. Before I was writing video game reviews for Destructoid.
Right.
And before that, I was writing video game reviews for Kevin Smith's MoviePoopshoot.com.
Oh, wow.
I was the only video game reviewer on Kevin Smith's website. And that's where I, started writing reviews of stuff. And I did a Kickstarter last year where I'm doing reviews now on the YouTube page that I call Reviewsicles, where I review video games with a comedy song. I haven't done enough of those yet because I got sidetracked by finishing an album.
It seems perfectly reasonable to me.
I thought so. But anything that's like comic book based or video game based, even if it's terrible, I have to see it. It's kind of like by proxy, because these are my main fandoms, video games and comic books. It's such a broad spectrum to be like such a fandom of.
Sure, of course.
I guess if you want to narrow it down, I think my bio for FuMP Fest says that I have an unhealthy obsession with Spider-Man. Which is not inaccurate. My dog's name is Parker. Figure it out.
But it's also kind of dangerous in this modern society to be a fan of Spider-Man, considering so much of his stuff has been crap lately. I mean, some worse than others.
Yeah, I get that, but at the same time, some of the comics are still good.
Sure.
If you get the characterization right, that's sometimes for me that's all that matters. I get choked up at heroics. It's stupid. I realize it's stupid. And I'm just one of those stupid little sensitive kids who loves that kind of shit. Like, just watching a good sequence in a movie of him web-swinging and doing heroics and saving somebody, I literally get choked up watching that. It's like the sequence in the end of Iron Man 3. It's not a Spider-Man thing, but stay with me here. Where he's saving the 13 people from falling out of the... Holy shit, man. That's heroics. That makes me feel like that's amazing in this comic book, and I love it.
Sure.
It's that kind of stuff. The whole movie itself may not be great, but there's always those sequences that make you go, yes, that's what I want to see when I see a comic book movie.
Totally.
And of course,
What were you going to say?
I was going to say, and of course, there's the other fandoms of Star Trek and all that stuff, but, those are the main ones.
Gotcha. Yeah, well, I mean, and I hear you when it comes to superhero movies especially, because, like, as me, the kind of personality I am, I come out of a superhero movie, like, I walk out of X-Men and then look at my knuckles just wanting those claws to come out. Like, why not me? Why can't I? But, I get that. I mean, it's what's dangerous about seeing comic book movies made by Joss Whedon, because someone's going to die, and when they do, you're going to be upset about it.
Yes, exactly. Why do you hurt us so, and why do we love you so?
Exactly. So then, since you've mentioned Star Trek before and other fandoms, are you Star Trek over Star Wars, or are you one of those rare breeds like myself where you like both equally for different reasons?
I love both equally for different reasons.
It's a rare breed these days. People still like to choose
It
sides.
is, isn't it?
And I'm like,
yeah, man, it's like Elvis versus the Beatles. It's, you know, it's you're either one or the other. No, man, we can live in harmony. You know, my whole thing, I've been going to cons, I've been going to conventions since I was a kid, and when I went to conventions, they were Star Trek conventions. They were fan-run. None of these were like creation cons. But I went to Star Trek conventions because that's what the conventions were for, and you'd see maybe one or two other things there, some Doctor Who, some Red Dwarf. And the first multimedia convention I went to, it blew my mind. I'm like, there are so many other things I can... And they're all here, and nobody cares that they're all intermingling. It's amazing. And all the Star Trek cons I went to all became multimedia cons because everybody likes everything.
Yeah.
It's the beauty of being a nerd. And that's the other thing. Everybody's a nerd, by the way.
Yeah.
I call jocks sports nerds. Come on.
It's true.
Just the same thing.
If you look at fantasy football, it's just D&D with football players. I mean, it's
exactly. I put that in a lyric. I mean,
exactly. It's funny because so my whole spiel with autographs kind of and Crash Chords in general was born out of the nerdist Chris Hardwick. My fandom for him inspired me to do something similar but different on my own. But one thing he always said, and what I loved in his book, is that everyone's a nerd or a geek, but it's what they're passionate about that determines what kind. You know, you can love sports, love music, love trains, love bridges, love architecture. You're still a nerd about those things. Everybody has something they're nerdy about.
Abso-freaking-lutely.
And I think it's why, you know, as a podcaster, somehow I can still convince myself that someone will listen to me break down a record track by track for 2 hours. You know, it's that idea that there are nerds out there who, you know, my main show is not for people who want to hear an album rating and that's it and move on. Ours are for the nerds who are like, oh yeah, I noticed that instrumentation too. Oh, I love that lyric. I wonder what it means. Let's philosophize about it. Even though philosophize is not a word, but we're moving on. You know, it's this idea that because of the internet, you have this access to stuff that you could have never found even a decade ago.
Absolutely, and to kind of piggyback on that, I've always been a music nerd too.
Yes.
You can kind of hear it in the influences that I choose when I do style parodies or pastiches, but I worked at a music store for 7 years before doing any of the comedy stuff, and you know, all the records that I would get, sure, there'd be the stacks of comedy albums I would walk out with, but I spent $50 a week at my store and a store across the street that was not affiliated with my store, because it was high school and all my income was disposable, on any kind of record that I could get my hands on. You know, I love music, and that's why I dig Crash Chords.
Well, I appreciate that. It's one of those things also that I found as an adult, because of the access we have to the internet, you can kind of dive into music in a different way. I mean, I've always listened to albums like I was reading a book. Like, I can listen to music while doing other stuff, but I'm perfectly happy to sit in a room with my iPod on, just listening to an album, doing nothing, just focusing on the music. And it comes from being a nerd about that stuff. And like when I started my blog before it became a podcast, it seemed like the next step is to create something where I can talk about music, and then a review show was the natural evolution. And then, of course, my selfish desire, because I knew a lot of musicians, to then create an interview show so I can chat with cool people about awesome things, like you do.
Well, thank you. Yes, it's great. You know, yes, it's a beautiful format to kind of gestate from. These are not words that I should be saying. I'm going to stop now.
The next thing I wanted to ask, actually, is about your quote-unquote stage name, your performer name, Insane Ian, which is born of your actual name, Ian Bonds, which you had mentioned earlier. The Insane Ian, is that just a natural evolution of an homage to Weird Al, or is there a reason that you picked Insane Ian as your moniker?
It's kind of both. On the Dr. Demento show, he had a cast of people who always were on the show with him, and a lot of them were very onomatopoeic, and I'm sorry, not onomatopoeic, alliterative.
Right.
You had Good Time Gil, you had Whimsical Will, you have Musical Mike, and Insane Ian was kind of born from that. At the same time, Insane Ian and Weird Al, yes, of course, there's still that hero worship. One of my friends used to perform under the name Odd Austin, and then he went, no, that's too much of a hero worship thing now, and he just performs as Austin Eschliman, and he has a band called Smashy Claw, which, by the way, if you've not heard Smashy Claw, they're phenomenal. And it's kind of like if Joko and They Might Be Giants had an awesome baby. They're really great.
You're kind of speaking my language, so I'll have to go check them out.
Yeah, I figured I might be. So, Austin has appeared on a couple of my records. He actually plays the backing music for Metroid on Internet Famous.
Oh, nice.
And is a good friend of mine. But anyway, so the name Insane Ian was actually kind of birthed from my high school physics teacher. I was telling him about what I was going to be performing at the high school coffee house, these songs that I had written and these covers of Weird Al songs, because my Sega CD that I had at the time was the JVC XI. It was an off-brand Sega CD, if you can believe that, but it was still authorized by Sega. The JVC XI was a Sega Genesis and Sega CD unit in one system, and It was also a karaoke machine. And the karaoke machine could remove the vocal tracks from any CD you put into it. So I could.
That's awesome.
This is instant parody machine. Yes. So I would make tapes of the audio tracks, and that's how I would perform when I was in high school, because I have no musical talent of my own. I don't play instruments. I just write the songs, and I guess you could call what I do singing, kind of. But for the most part, that's what I was doing. And I told my high school physics teacher, this is what I'm doing for the coffee house. And he goes, you're insane, Ian. And I went, there's a name.
Well played. I mean, I too, as I'm sure you can tell, am a fan of alliteration with Crash Chords.
Absolutely.
And our album reviews called Record Reviews, the written ones. So, I think that there's something that makes it easier for memorization if the words are similar. I feel like it sticks better and it's catchier, so I definitely get that, and it's always interesting to hear how those names come up. Like I remember the first time I ever interviewed Schaefer. It was a written interview, a text-based interview before I was doing these, and I asked him where Schaefer the Dark Lord came from, and he was like, "Well, actually, like I assumed it was like maybe Ozzy Osbourne related, or it was Like, it could have been anything. And he's like, no, actually, it's the Dark Lord of the Sith, Darth Vader, but nobody calls him that in the movie. I'm like, oh, duh, of course, So it's fun to kind of figure out where those things come from. The next thing I actually wanted to ask you about was the sketches on your record. So you've done a bunch of really great comedy sketches, and I kind of enjoy the nonchalance about the ones on the newest record in particular, like taking a phone conversation with Schaefer, or creating the format of a phone conversation with Schaefer, you asking him to be on the album, and then stealing a thing that he did on his album where he, quote-unquote, recorded MC Frontalot and worked that into your album, or meeting Paul and Storm after a concert and chatting an interview, and this totally won't be on my record. Where did the ideas for the sketches come from, or is it just things you kind of toy with and then approach the artist?
Actually, honestly, the sketches kind of came from Schaefer.
Oh, cool.
I had asked Schaefer if he'd be interested in doing another song with me. He and I had worked previously on a song that our friend Kiki, We're All Gonna Die, which is on Grand Theft Audio, which is still, to this day, probably my most popular track, and probably because Schaefer's on it. No, actually, undoubtedly because Schaefer's on it. But we had done that track before, and I said, hey, I was wondering if you wanted to do another song. I'm thinking of doing a response to your song, Cat People. But I like dogs. So I want to do, your Cat People is the name of a movie. I'm going to do a song that's named after a movie called Must Love Dogs. And he's like, I'm interested, but at the same time, I'm also trying to finish Sick Passenger, so it's not going to be something I'm going to do right now. And I'm like, cool, no problem, understand. I was still working on the album, so it never happened. Then waited until Sick Passenger came out, and I'm like, hey, wanted to hit you up again since you're done with this. Wanted to know if you were still interested in possibly doing the song. And he's like, you know what? I just did a whole bunch of things. I just really don't think I want to do any collabos right now. And I'm like, all right, well, that makes sense, totally. I get that. It's cool. He's like, but you can sample Cat People for your song. And you know what? If you want, you can sample the song. And I'm like, that's a great idea. Do you think we could turn this conversation into, like, a sketch for the album? He goes, that's actually not a terrible idea. Yeah, I'd totally be willing to do that. So
that's cool.
The sketch that's on the album is almost verbatim what the actual conversation with Schaefer was. I tried to make it funnier, but...
No, it was pretty funny. I mean, and then, of course, working in, Ian, you ignorant slut, and stuff like that,
Yes.
For people who would definitely appreciate it with a history of nerdy things, I think that's pretty great. I mean, I got a sense of that, too. Like, later on the album, you do another phone call sketch, and I just like the natural form that the sketches take. I've talked with other artists how when they have conversational moments on their records, how kind of natural it feels for this character or persona you're creating, which mostly is true to yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it is a character. He's a little bit more neurotic than I am, although talking to me in this interview, maybe you don't believe that. But, he's a little bit more... there's a lot of self-deprecating humor with Insane Ian as far as the stage persona goes. And I did get some feedback on these sketches, and that some people really didn't get dig on the self-deprecating humor in the sketches, and some of the sketches kind of went on too long. I got a little too expositionally in them, and I can kind of see that. I kind of wish I'd self-edited a little bit more, but I was running down to a deadline and went, I'm just going to put this out like this. The Poland Storm sketch actually was 9 minutes, and I edited it down to 6. These are a little long for sketches. So
yeah.
If you want a better example of sketches, I have a side project I do called Scooter Picnic with another comedy musician friend of mine named TV's Kyle. And we did February album writing month, where you do 14 songs in 28 days.
Wow.
And because we're sadistic, we fully produced these songs.
Oh, wow.
In February album writing month, you can just write them or just do rough demos. No, we did the whole album in February. And the album that we actually put out from this is actually 26 tracks, because we released other things at other times and put them on the album. So there are sketches on that kind of connect some of the songs to the February album writing month theme. They're much shorter, they're much more succinct, and they're, I think, probably better. As far as kind of a through narrative. This one I had the narrative of, because Schaefer gave me the idea of doing it as a sketch, it gave me the through line of, oh great, that can tie the theme of the album of being internet famous together, and that's kind of what spawned the other two sketches.
Oh, okay. Well, that through line's definitely there. I mean, you can definitely sense the kind of overall theme of the record. I also enjoy, on a very side note, that all of your album covers, because I'm very astute to all kinds of parody, that they're either video game cover parodies or album cover parody. And I very much enjoy your Welcome to the Black Parade parody album cover, and, of course, for the newest one that you parody, one of my favorite games of all time, Final Fantasy VII.
Yes, thank you. I'm a big fan of art parody as well. I love when Weird Al's album covers have parodied. There's that Soul Asylum, parody of Whipped Cream and Other Delights, where it's spaghetti sauce and other delights or whatever one. That album has been parodied millions of times.
Sure.
But, Stephen Lynch's album, Three Balloons, that album cover is a parody of the T-Rex Greatest Hits. And it's an obscure album cover parody. And, I never expected that that's an actual parody. I love parody artwork. And Luke Ski, who does a sketch, the final sketch on the album, did the artwork for the Welcome to the Last Arcade.
Nice.
And actually, his sketch is a response to the sketch on the end of that album.
Wow. I mean, through lines like that are very important, especially for people who are paying close attention to the discography, which is really cool, which I clearly have not. I've kind of been listening on random on Spotify because That's how I roll sometimes. But I do enjoy that also the newest album cover is drawn, as I recall, by the infamous Thor Thorvaldsen. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
And he is someone that I've come across a few times because Michael Kiel, who I interviewed, his newest album was done by him. Sulfur had a Thor album that was drawn by Thor Thorvaldsen, which is even more meta. I really enjoy his art style, and you can notice it immediately. It's just the way he kind of animates that hops, and so it made that album cover really jump out, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, I've been really lucky in that I've been able to hook up with some amazing artists on these albums, and Thor is absolutely no exception to that, because his artwork was phenomenal. And he actually did some back cover artwork for the physical copy of Internet Famous that people haven't seen yet. There are other pieces that he did, because the limited edition of the CD has been pushed back so many times. I got sick at the beginning of the year. I got kidney stones right around the time for the second time, when the album was supposed to be released on physical CD. I was putting out a 4-disc limited edition. It was the 2-disc album because the album is a double album, and it had a bonus disc of acoustic tracks and a bonus disc of all the instrumentals. And then I got kidney stones. That got pushed back. And then there was a problem with the printing, so I was going to correct that. And right before getting that corrected, I got pneumonia.
Oh, jeez.
So it has not been a fun health year for me. So things have gotten kind of far too delayed. That'll eventually come out. But there's some amazing artwork that Thor did on this. He has a drawing of me as Miley Cyrus riding a super monkey ball.
Nice.
He has a drawing that goes along with Just Give Me a Season, which is a parody of the Pink song Just Give Me a Reason. So there's artwork that matches the single of that song. And there's a picture of me in Samus's armor for the Metroid parody. Nice. And all of that goes along. So the whole album artwork, and I do this with all the CDs too, it's not just the front cover. I make the whole album parody what I'm parodying. So if, like, the first album is a parody of a DS box,
right?
The back of the CD case has, like, the little warnings from Nintendo.
Oh, nice. On,
like, epilepsy, but I've altered them. You know, the track listing is, like, talking about what's in the game, and there's screenshots. You know, so I try to make it as much of an accurate parody of the original work as possible, you know, down to, you know, the little minutest detail, because I'm insane, apparently. Well, it's not just a clever name.
Well, I appreciate that, though, and don't think I went amiss to not notice that you mentioned that the newest album is 4 discs, like the original Final Fantasy VII, which is multiple discs, hence making it a multiple disc case like the original Final Fantasy VII.
Exactly.
So I appreciate detail work like that. It's the kind of stuff that we pick apart and love to celebrate on the other podcasts. So I applaud you for that attention to detail. It is, as a music nerd, a very awesome thing.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
So obviously you've had some things come up, so it did delay the official release of the physical copy. I imagine since you're working on the FuMP, you have plenty of music. I do want to bring up, actually, your newest single to come out on Spotify, which is a love letter to Mr. Benedict Cumberbatch.
Yes.
I imagine that came from the FuMP. It's one of the songs that you released along the way.
Yes, that is a song that I released on the FuMP. It was released, I tried to get it on Spotify and iTunes and everything around the same time. I'm actually working on a music video for it as well, so I'm trying to put that song kind of out there, as well as working on music videos for stuff from Internet Famous, because I have all the time in the world, clearly. That's my problem. I work on too many projects at once. I can't narrow my field. It's the ADD, I swear.
I can relate to that as someone who has a lot of irons in the fire and a day job and also planning a wedding. Shit gets tight when you are working on that kind of stuff.
Oh, absolutely. And by the way, congratulations on the impending nuptials.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I've never been more excited to get married at the end of this month, so I don't have to plan anything anymore. I'm excited about saying I do, I've hated the planning process. Because if you think
I
you're
know that
insane
feels.
now, plan a wedding, then you truly earn that name.
Well, I celebrate my wedding anniversary actually the week before you get married.
Oh, well, congratulations. So there you go.
Thank you. Well, we will be away for our 6-year anniversary, which is actually our 12-year relationship anniversary, the week before you get married. So which is the reason I'm not doing New York Funny Songs Fest this year, actually.
Well, congratulations nonetheless. But then you know exactly what I'm talking, so I take that back. You clearly earned the title Insane Ian if you planned the wedding. There you go. But so with Benedict Cumberbatch, what I enjoy about that song is the song fits a sketch format, which I always love. It's why I love the narratives on Sick Passenger and other stuff that kind of has a storyline. I enjoy that the storyline of that song is you in the studio. You're essentially just throwing the song together because you looked it up on Wikipedia and you wanted to do a song about him while he's hot. But then the continual breakdown of communication as the chorus gets more and more ridiculous just adds a level of funny that I appreciate.
Excellent. Well, thank you. That's exactly what I was going for. And that song becomes more fun to perform live, too, because I'll be on stage with my phone reading the lyrics off of Wikipedia.
Excellent.
And it becomes kind of like this interactive thing with the audience of how much is the recording messing with him now? You know, because I don't have a band backing me. I just have, my music back there. Sure. And it's like, is the Wikipedia page I'm looking at, has that been hacked? It's a fun one to do live, too. So
fantastic. That's really cool. Do you have any plans for going on? I mean, obviously, your wedding anniversary is coming up, and you're working on some other stuff. Do you have any plans to go on a tour or visit some other cities and perform anytime soon?
I would love to. See, these months are getting like really, really tightly knit. This coming up was supposed to be the end of May is my anniversary. The very end of May was going to be New York Funny Songs Fest, and the week after that was going to be FuMP Fest.
Right.
FuMP Fest is a 3-day music festival, comedy music festival in Chicago, where it's like 15 acts. Plus the guest of honor, the Arrogant Worms, who are a big act in Canada. They've had lots of hits on the Dr. Demento show, like Carrot Juice's Murder, and plenty of songs of like that. And they're a great act. The 5th Annual Comedy Music Awards, known as the Logan Awards, are going to be held there this year. I'm emceeing. This is the second year of FuMP Fest, and I've emceed both years, so I'm not just performing, but I'm hosting the entire weekend, so I'm introducing all the acts as well.
That's cool.
And so I do gigs up and down the East Coast. This is my only kind of non-East Coast gig because I have a day job too. So I, can't really do too many things outside long distance as much as I would like sometimes. But that's okay because, it's the nature of the beast.
Sure, yeah. When you're an independent artist releasing your own stuff, you don't have a big record label shipping you places. You have to do it all
Exactly.
yourself.
We can't all be Adam Warrock.
That's very true. We can't. The dude is everywhere. It's funny, too, because what I love about getting into indie artists through the wormhole of Spotify and clicking from link to link is that I'll go back and listen to old albums and discover artists who are on them that I didn't realize were that artist at the time because I didn't know them from a hole in the wall. Like, I went back and listened to Adam Warrock's older record, and Dr. Awkward is on a track that I didn't realize is on it because I only got into Dr. Awkward recently, and things like that.
Right.
So that's always fun. Or, like, because of you, I've gone and checked out Devo Spice's stuff, and so on. It's nice to be able to just click right through on Spotify and find those artists.
Absolutely. Devo is kind of been a huge mentor for me as far as comedy music, too, because I was always a fan of his podcast, Manic Mondays, and when I was starting to do comedy music, him and Luke Ski were kind of like the big names at the FuMP, and also kind of like the reigning kings of the Dr. Demento show at the time, and still are, actually. And so that was kind of like the big influence, and I'm like, I'm going to latch on to these guys and see what I can learn from them. I mean, my first actual gig as Insane and Current was opening for Devo Spice when he came into town and doing the one song I had done.
Well, I mean, if I've learned anything from the internet, it's that the way you get anywhere is by latching on to those more popular than you.
Writing the coattails to success. Yes.
Yes, as mentioned in your Paul and Storm sketch. I think that, though, truthfully, I think the benefit of any community, and I see a lot of similarities in the comedy music scene and the nerdcore scene, is that everyone's so supportive, and everyone wants to work together, and everyone wants to, if not work together, promote or help or chat or anything. And it's made it, for me as a host of a show, really awesome, because I interviewed one guy and then chatted through him to 3 other guys, and then next thing I know, the majority of my interviews over the last 6 months to a year have been nerdcore rappers because of the connections I made. And it's really cool.
Right.
I feel like that these artists just have a camaraderie.
Yeah, absolutely. It's for lack of a better way of describing it, it's very ancestral.
Yes.
I mean, MC Lars was on the FuMP.
Yeah, and my interview with MC Lars I was able to do because friends of mine. So I have there's a local rap group in New York that I'm good friends with named the Wall Street Players, and their shtick is that they only rap about finance. So they are finance nerd rappers. And one of them is actually friends with Lars. So through that, I was able to make a connection with Lars. And Lars is actually the only in-person interview thus far that I've done for autographs. Because when him and MC Chris came to New York, I caught their show, and then afterwards we sat in the tour van and chat. And that's really awesome, that he took the time after doing a very long show to still chat and do an interview. And it's just nice that those connections exist. And the FuMP, is a fascinating thing to me because I didn't honestly knew it existed until I discovered your stuff. And now I'm digging through all of the stuff that I found on those collections and everything. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I would love that I was able to stumble onto the FuMP the way that I did and discover this whole comedy music community. And it really is a community there, too. And, people who are doing things online like dementiaradio.org, who are kind of like doing the same thing Dr. Demento does and hosting radio shows and playing comedy music. And when they're not radio shows on there, it's just a random cast stream of comedy music. And, the FuMP kind of led me to that, and there's more comedy music, and the Dr. Demento show is still on and still doing things. And because of the FuMP, I've been able to meet Dr. Demento.
Yeah.
It was a childhood dream. Not only that, I'm going to be in the Dr. Demento documentary. I get to say I'm in a movie with Weird Al and Chris Hardwick. That's neat.
Yeah, it's pretty neat indeed. Not a lot of people can say that. So, and Dr. Demento is one of those guys that's kind of done so much for comedy music and comedy in general. He's touched so many people, musicians too, because he's just a fan of music too. It's not just comedy.
Absolutely, yeah.
And
he's such a brilliant mind and he's such an insane amount of knowledge about so many intricacies of music styles and where things came from and what begat what else as far as musical genres. He's a huge blues fan, but we know him from the love of comedy music. And honestly, if it weren't for him, there would be no FuMP. Not so much there wouldn't even be a Weird Al, we know that, but like the influence of the other things that he's played, like Spike Jones and Tom Lehrer and Stan Freberg, who unfortunately just recently passed. Hearing all of those music, man, that I was like, it's not just Weird Al that does funny stuff. There's all this other stuff. Blew my freaking mind, and I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to get on that show, and now I get to say I finally am.
Fantastic. Well, Ian, I really appreciate you taking the time. I appreciate your loyalty to my show and your loyalty to comedy in general. I really enjoy the new album, and I'm looking forward to more stuff. Is there anything before we wrap up that you want to promote specifically to the listeners?
I want to say thank you for all of that, because I appreciate that, and you having me on, because that's awesome, and you made me all kinds of blush now. Yes, promotions. I am sadly a promotion machine. And by the way, thank you for letting me ramble on, because I tend to ramble. Here I go again.
You rambling makes my job easier, because this is between 45 minutes to an hour, and if you don't ramble, I have to come up with shit to say. So you rambling just makes my job easier. So thank you.
And here's one subject that I never get tired of, talking about me. But anyway, yes, insaneian.bandcamp.com, where there are literally dozens, hundreds of songs that, even more than there are on Spotify and anything else, more than there are on iTunes. I have a release on there called Katy Parody, which is a 4-song EP of just Katy Perry parodies, because why not? By the way, Devo Spice has called that the most disturbing cover art he's ever seen. And I'll let your listeners and you figure out why. But I have a music video coming out soon for both Benedict Cumberbatch and for a song from Internet Famous called It's Burger Time. Both of those music videos should be coming out soonish, hopefully by the end of May.
Okay.
And possibly a new release coming out in time for FuMP Fest, which is the first weekend in June.
Awesome. Well, this interview, since we release them bi-weekly, you probably come out the first week of June. If my math is correct. So if any of those things are out at the time, which sounds like they will be, I will link whatever I can to the article that goes up on the site. Again, thank you for taking the time, Ian. It's been a pleasure not only getting to know you as an artist, but becoming a fast internet friend. I hope that if you're ever in New York, you will definitely look me up. I would love to get to chat with you in person, possibly have you on the main show and bring an album to a review.
Absolutely, I would love that, and thank you so much for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ian. I will talk to you soon and see you on the internet.
Sounds good. See you later.
If you enjoyed these interviews, please subscribe to this and the Crash Chords podcast on iTunes, where you can also rate us and review us. You can also like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at Crash Chords Web, our Tumblr, and our YouTube channel. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to post in the comment area below each post. And keep the discussion going, because remember, music is life, and life is good.